The guitar was smoking, literally smoking, thick white clouds pouring from the neck during Ace Frehley's solo, and the crowd at the Fillmore East was losing its mind. 18,000 people screaming, convinced they were witnessing some kind of cosmic magic, Space Ace summoning literal smoke from his instrument like he was channeling forces from another dimension. But backstage, 3 feet from the amp stack, a stagehand stood with a fire extinguisher, watching the guitar nervously, ready to rush the stage if those white clouds turned into actual flames. Because what the audience didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that this was the first time Ace had ever tried this effect live. And 6 hours earlier, during final tech rehearsal, the exact same setup had caught fire and nearly burned his hand. It was March 1976, and Ace Frehley was about to either revolutionize rock guitar theatrics or end his career in a hospital burn unit. The odds felt about 50-50. The smoking guitar didn't start with some grand vision or calculated marketing plan. It started on a random Tuesday afternoon in late 1975 in Ace's garage in Wilton, Connecticut, with a broken fog machine, a chemistry set he'd bought at a hobby shop, and the kind of boredom that leads talented people to do either brilliant or incredibly stupid things. Ace had moved to the suburbs after Kiss's first big paycheck started coming in, buying a house with a 2-car garage that he immediately converted into a workshop. Not a music rehearsal space, though he had guitars and amps set up, more like a mad scientist's laboratory filled with tools, electronics components, car parts he'd scavenged, and various partially disassembled devices he'd taken apart to understand how they worked. Ace had always been a tinkerer. As a kid in the Bronx, he'd taken apart radios, rebuilt them, modified them to pick up frequencies they weren't supposed to receive. He'd built his own effects pedals before companies sold them commercially, soldering circuits on his bedroom floor while his mother yelled about the smell. His first electric guitar had been a disaster of a cheap model that he'd systematically upgraded, replacing pickups, rewiring the electronics, adjusting the action until it played like an instrument worth 10 times what he'd paid. For Ace, the technical side of music was almost as interesting as the playing itself, understanding how things worked, how to make them work better, how to create effects and sounds that nobody else had. Kiss's stage show by 1975 had become increasingly theatrical. Gene breathing fire, Paul flying on cables, platforms rising and falling, pyrotechnics exploding. But most of those effects were separate from the instruments. The spectacle happened around the music, not as part of it. Ace wanted something different. He wanted his guitar itself to do something impossible, something that would make people question what they were seeing. And one afternoon, watching a fog machine malfunction at a rehearsal, pumping out way more smoke than it was supposed to, Ace had a thought. What if the smoke came from the guitar? What if during his solo, his instrument itself started smoking like it was on fire, like it was too hot to handle, like the music itself was creating actual physical heat? The idea was insane, and Ace knew it. But he couldn't let it go. He started researching in the Wilton Public Library, checking out books on special effects, stage magic, chemistry. The reference librarian gave him increasingly concerned looks as he requested books on smoke generation, combustion, pyrotechnic effects. Ace didn't explain what he was working on, just smiled and took his stack of books home. He learned about smoke pellets, the kind magicians used for disappearing acts. He learned about titanium powder, which could create white sparks when ignited. He studied how stage effects were triggered remotely, how performers activated effects while playing. And slowly, a plan started forming. The guitar itself was the first problem. He couldn't use his main Les Paul, the guitar he played every night on tour. If this experiment went wrong and destroyed the instrument, he'd be in serious trouble. So he bought a cheap Les Paul copy from a pawn shop in Norwego, something that looked similar enough to his regular guitar but that he wouldn't cry about if it melted. And in his garage, surrounded by tools and diagrams he'd sketched on graph paper, Ace began the modification process. The basic concept was simple in theory, impossibly complex in execution. He needed to create a chamber inside the guitar that could hold smoke-generating material. He needed a way to ignite or activate that material remotely while playing. He needed the smoke to exit through the guitar in a way that looked dramatic but didn't interfere with actually playing the instrument. and he needed all of this to be safe enough that he wouldn't literally catch on fire on stage in front of thousands of people. The first prototype was a disaster. Ace drilled a cavity into the back of the guitar body, installed a small metal chamber, loaded it with a smoke pellet, and rigged a battery-powered heating element to activate it. He'd installed a small button near the volume knob that would complete the circuit and trigger the smoke. The theory was solid. The execution was catastrophic. When he tested it in his garage, the smoke pellet ignited properly, but the smoke had nowhere to go. It filled the guitar's internal cavity, built up pressure, and then started leaking out every seam and crack in unpredictable directions. Smoke came from the pickup cavities, from around the neck joint, from the output jack. The guitar looked less like a cosmic instrument and more like a badly designed barbecue. And then the heating element, which Ace had installed too close to the wood, started scorching the interior of the guitar. He could smell burning wood, see small wisps of actual smoke, the bad kind, starting to appear. Ace yanked the battery connection, grabbed a towel, smothered the whole thing. Crisis averted, but barely. Prototype number 2 involved a different approach. Instead of trying to contain the smoke inside the guitar, Ace decided to embrace external mounting. He attached a small metal tube to the guitar's neck, running along the side where it wouldn't interfere with playing. The smoke pellet chamber sat at the base of the neck, hidden behind the headstock. When activated, smoke would travel through the tube and exit near the headstock, creating the visual effect he wanted. This version worked better. The smoke went where it was supposed to go. But the amount was pathetic, just a thin wisp that wouldn't be visible past the first few rows in an arena. And the metal tube looked obvious, amateurish. Gene and Paul would never approve putting something that looked that crude on stage. Winter 1975 turned into early 1976, and Ace was spending almost every free day in his garage, obsessing over this project. His wife thought he was losing his mind. Gene and Paul didn't know what he was working on. He'd kept it secret, knowing they'd probably tell him to focus on music and let professionals handle stage effects. But Ace was determined. This had to work. This had to be his thing, his signature, the element of the Kiss show that was uniquely his. Prototype 3 was closer. He'd figured out that the smoke needed to be generated externally and fed into the guitar through flexible tubing. He built a small smoke generator that could attach to his guitar strap, hidden against his back during performance. Flexible clear tubing ran up the strap and into a modified cavity in the guitar. When activated, the smoke generator would pump smoke through the tubing into the guitar and out through specially drilled holes he'd made near the neck pickup. The effect was better, much better. Thick white smoke pouring from the guitar like it was overheating. But now he had a new problem. The smoke generator was heavy, battery-powered, and had to be activated manually. He couldn't reach behind his back to turn it on while playing a solo. He needed a remote trigger. Electronics had never been Ace's strongest area. He could solder basic circuits, but designing a reliable wireless triggering system was beyond his expertise. So he started calling around to special effects companies, trying to find someone who could help without asking too many questions about why a rock guitarist needed remote smoke activation. Most companies either didn't understand what he wanted or quoted prices that were insane. But eventually he found a guy in Newark, a special effects technician who worked in theater, who got it immediately. They worked together over several weeks, developing a small wireless transmitter that Ace could activate with a button installed in his guitar's body. When he pressed the button, it would signal the smoke generator on his back to activate. Simple, elegant, and it actually worked. By February 1976, Ace had a functioning prototype, not perfect, still needed refinement, but functional. He'd tested it dozens of times in his garage, working out the timing, figuring out how long the smoke would last, how to reload the smoke pellets between uses. He'd practiced playing while the smoke was pouring out, making sure it didn't obscure his vision or interfere with his hands. He'd checked and rechecked every connection, every wire, making sure nothing would short out or catch fire. At least, as sure as he could be without actually using it in a live performance situation, with stage lights and amplifiers and the chaos of an actual Kiss show. The question was when to debut it. Kiss had a major show coming up at the Fillmore East, a prestigious venue that would be packed with press and industry people. A perfect opportunity to unveil something new, but also high stakes. If the smoking guitar failed spectacularly in front of that crowd, it would be humiliating. Gene and Paul would never let him live it down. The press would write about the gimmick that didn't work. Ace debated waiting, testing more, making absolutely sure. But another part of him knew that you could test forever and never be completely certain. At some point, you had to just do it. 3 days before the Fillmore show, Ace told Gene and Paul what he'd been working on. They were at rehearsal, taking a break between songs, and Ace just casually mentioned that he'd developed a new guitar effect for the show. Gene was immediately interested. What kind of effect? Ace explained the smoking guitar concept. Gene's eyes lit up. This was exactly the kind of theatrical element he loved. Paul was more cautious, asking technical questions. How reliable was it? Had Ace tested it thoroughly? What if it malfunctioned on stage? Ace assured them he'd tested it extensively, that it was safe and reliable, which was mostly true. He'd tested it a lot. Whether it was truly reliable in a live situation, well, they were about to find out. The day of the Fillmore show, Ace arrived at the venue hours early with his modified guitar and the smoke generator rig. The stage crew looked at his setup with a mixture of confusion and concern. One of the lighting technicians asked if he'd cleared this with the venue's fire marshal. Ace admitted he hadn't. They made him do a test run during sound check, with a fire extinguisher standing by, just in case. The first test went perfectly. Smoke poured from the guitar on command, thick white clouds that looked incredible under the stage lights. The crew was impressed. Gene and Paul, watching from the side of the stage, were grinning. This was going to be killer. But the second test, the one they ran during final tech rehearsal about 6 hours before doors opened, went catastrophically wrong. Ace triggered the smoke, and initially everything looked fine. But after about 10 seconds, the smoke suddenly changed color, going from white to gray to an alarming dark black. And then Ace felt heat through his guitar strap. Not just warmth, actual painful heat against his back. He'd wired something wrong, or a connection had come loose, or the smoke pellet had ignited incorrectly. Whatever the technical cause, the smoke generator on his back was now producing actual fire instead of stage smoke. Ace quickly killed the power, yanked the entire rig off, threw it on the stage floor. A stagehand rushed over with an extinguisher, sprayed it down even though the fire had already gone out. The guitar was fine. Ace was fine, though his back had a painful red mark from the heat. But the smoke generator was toast, completely burned out. For 30 minutes, Ace considered scrapping the whole thing, going back to just playing regular guitar solos like he'd done for years. It wasn't worth catching on fire over a visual effect. But then he started examining the burned-out generator, trying to figure out what went wrong. And he realized it was simple, stupid mistake. He'd loaded 2 smoke pellets instead of 1, trying to get thicker smoke. The double pellet had created too much heat, more than the system was designed to handle. 1 pellet was enough. The design was fine. His ambition had been the problem. With 2 hours until showtime, Ace rebuilt the rig. Fresh smoke generator, fresh batteries, fresh wiring, this time just 1 pellet. He tested it backstage, carefully, briefly. It worked. The smoke was still thick enough, still dramatic enough, and nothing caught fire. Good enough. He put on his Space Ace makeup, got into his platform boots and costume, strapped on the modified guitar with the rebuilt smoke generator, felt the weight of it against his back, and tried not to think about the fact that he was about to activate a homemade pyrotechnic device during a guitar solo in front of 18,000 people after that same device had caught fire earlier in the day. The show started. Gene's fire breathing went perfectly. Paul's stage presence was electric as always. Peter's drum solo killed, and then came Ace's moment. The song was She, and Ace had the main solo. He positioned himself center stage, adjusted his grip on the guitar, took a breath. This was it. Either this worked and became his signature move, or it failed, and he'd spend the next year listening to Gene make jokes about the time Ace almost burned down the Fillmore. He started the solo. His fingers found the notes, muscle memory taking over. And about 8 bars in, at the moment he'd planned, he pressed the hidden button in his guitar body. For a horrible half-second, nothing happened. And then smoke started pouring from his guitar, thick, white, beautiful smoke billowing from the neck like the instrument itself was on fire. The crowd's reaction was immediate and massive, screaming, pointing, absolute pandemonium. People in the front rows were reaching toward the stage, trying to touch the cosmic magic happening in front of them. Ace kept playing, kept the solo going, and the smoke kept coming, thick clouds that the stage lights cut through in dramatic shafts. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then the smoke started thinning, the pellet burning out. But 30 seconds was enough. The crowd was losing its mind. Gene, waiting at the side of the stage, was grinning like Christmas had come early. Paul was shaking his head in disbelief, and Ace, still playing, felt something he hadn't felt in months. Pure creative satisfaction. He'd imagined something impossible, figured out how to make it real, and just successfully pulled it off in front of thousands of people. After the show, still in makeup and costume, Ace sat in his dressing room with the modified guitar across his lap. His back still hurt a little from the earlier burn, but he didn't care. The smoking guitar worked. It was real. It was his. Gene came in, sat down, looked at Ace for a long moment. That was incredible. We're doing that every show from now on. Paul followed, equally enthusiastic. The crowd went insane. I've never seen a reaction like that to a guitar effect. You created something special. Over the next weeks, Ace refined the system, made it more reliable, easier to reload, safer. Developed a routine for the road crew to check it before every show. Built backup units in case one failed. And the smoking guitar became a permanent part of the Kiss show, one of the signature moments that people talked about, that got photographed, that became iconic. Within a year, other guitarists started trying to copy the effect. Some succeeded, most failed, a few caught fire. Ace had done it first, done it best, and it was forever associated with Space Ace. Years later, in a 2003 interview, Ace was asked about the development of the smoking guitar. I wanted something that was mine, you know. Gene had the fire breathing. Paul had the flying. I needed my thing. And I'd rather build something myself than have some company sell it to me. The first time it worked live, at the Fillmore, I wasn't even sure it would work. Earlier that day, it had literally caught fire during rehearsal. But sometimes you just have to go for it. Best case, you create something amazing. Worst case, you end up in the emergency room. Rock and roll, right? The guitar he'd used for those first tests, the pawn shop Les Paul copy he'd modified in his garage, eventually ended up in a museum. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has it on display now, labeled as the first smoking guitar in rock history. The description mentions Ace Frehley's innovation, his technical skill, his contribution to theatrical rock performance. But it doesn't mention the garage experiments, the failed prototypes, the burn mark on his back from when the rig caught fire hours before he used it successfully for the first time. It doesn't mention the obsessive tinkering, the library research, the dozens of tests. It just shows the result, the magic without the work. But Ace knows the work, knows that every innovation that looks like magic to the audience required hours of unglamorous trial and error, failed attempts, small improvements, persistent dedication. The smoking guitar didn't happen because Ace was lucky or because someone handed him the technology. It happened because he spent months in his garage, alone, figuring it out, refusing to give up even when the fourth prototype failed, just like the first three. That persistence, that refusal to accept that something couldn't be done, that willingness to risk looking stupid or getting hurt in pursuit of a creative vision, that's what separated Ace Frehley from the countless other guitarists who could play just as well but never created anything new. The legacy of the smoking guitar extends beyond Kiss. It opened up a new category of stage effects, guitar-integrated spectacle that became standard in arena rock. Eddie Van Halen experimented with light-up guitars. Randy Rhoads developed custom wireless effects triggers, used modified guitars with built-in effects. All of them, whether they acknowledged it or not, were building on what Ace had pioneered in his Connecticut garage in 1975. The idea that the guitar itself could be a theatrical element, not just a musical instrument. that the performer could modify, customize, innovate their equipment to create new possibilities. And for Ace, that was always the point. Not just to play what others had played, but to create what hadn't existed before, to see a limitation and figure out how to overcome it, to imagine something impossible and then spend months making it possible. The smoking guitar was never about the smoke itself. It was about the principle that if you could imagine it clearly enough and work on it persistently enough, you could make it real, even if it caught fire a few times along the way. This story is based on documented accounts of Ace Frehley's development of the smoking guitar effect in the mid-1970s. Conversations and specific technical details have been dramatized while staying true to what actually happened. This narrative was created with AI assistance to bring these historical moments to life. If this story moved you, if you've ever built something in your garage that others said was impossible, if you've ever taken a creative risk that could have failed spectacularly but succeeded, instead, share this. Tell your story in the comments. Subscribe for more stories about the innovations that changed rock and roll, the risks that paid off, the garage experiments that became legendary.